A billionaire thought he'd heard every plea for help, until a 6-year-old walked into his office and asked for a job, revealing a truth that shattered him. Andrew Harrington's office towered above the city like a silent, glass giant, reflecting the late-morning sun in cold, disciplined angles. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive coffee, and the only sound was the steady tapping of Andrew's fingers on the keyboard as he scrolled through another frustrating, poorly written report. He had barely slept the night before, wrestling with the fallout from a failed merger and the discovery that someone on his executive team had been feeding information to competitors. His temples pulsed with a thin, dull ache, but he forced himself to stay focused. Distractions were luxuries he could not afford. For years he had built his empire on precision and discipline, expecting the same from everyone around him, yet lately the world seemed determined to test the limits of his patience. He reached for a stack of documents, flipping through them with a tired sigh, when a soft scraping noise near the door made him pause. At first, he ignored it, assuming it was maintenance or someone delivering mail. But then the door creaked just enough for a tiny figure to slip through. Andrew straightened slowly, unsure if stress was finally making him hallucinate. Standing inside his office, barely reaching the height of his desk, was a little girl, around 6 years old, with pale skin, a neatly buttoned white shirt tucked into black dress pants, and a bright red tie that looked too big for her thin frame. Her blonde hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, though a few curls escaped and framed her cheeks. Her blue eyes, far too large, far too solemn for a child, locked onto his with unsettling determination. Before he could speak, she took a careful step forward, clutching the strap of her small, worn backpack. Her voice came out soft but steady, shaped by fear but held upright by something stronger beneath it. "Can I work for you?" she asked, the words so sincere and out of place that Andrew simply stared at her, unsure he had heard correctly. He rose from his chair, trying to process what was happening. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" he asked, gentler than he expected. He had dealt with aggressive board members, outraged investors, and manipulative competitors, but nothing in his career had prepared him for a child walking into his office asking for a job. The girl swallowed nervously and repeated herself, though her voice cracked slightly, revealing how much courage the first attempt had required. "Can I work for you?" Andrew approached slowly, lowering himself to one knee so they were eye level. Up close, he noticed the faint redness on her knuckles, the tiny tremor in her fingertips, and the exhaustion in her expression that did not belong on a 6-year-old's face. "Why would you ask something like that?" he asked softly. "You're far too young to work. Someone should be taking care of you." The girl bit her lip, and he saw the moment her composure splintered just enough to show the fear beneath. "I need money for my mom's medicine," she whispered. "She's very sick, and I don't know what else to do." She looked down at her shoes as if expecting him to scold her, then forced herself to meet his eyes again. "She used to work for you. Cleaning the offices. But she got too sick and couldn't come anymore. They told her she lost her job. And now she can't get better because we can't pay for her medicine. So I thought, maybe I could work instead." Her voice wavered, but she refused to cry. Andrew felt something inside him shift painfully. He remembered her mother, Anna Miller, quiet, hardworking, always arriving early, always staying late to finish every task perfectly. He had signed a form weeks ago approving her voluntary resignation, trusting the explanation given by his HR director. Now he realized he might have signed something far more complicated and far more cruel. He reached out carefully, placing a reassuring hand on the girl's shoulder. "What's your name?" "Emma," she answered softly. "Emma Miller." The name hit him like a jolt. He inhaled slowly, trying to steady the sudden storm of guilt and anger rising inside him. He thought of boardrooms and profit margins, of numbers that decided people's lives without ever acknowledging their humanity. He thought of how easily a struggling employee could slip through the cracks of a machine too big to notice the individuals keeping it running. But most of all, he thought of this child, this tiny, trembling force of bravery, who had climbed 52 flights of stairs because she believed he was her last hope. He met her eyes again, hearing his own voice shift into something quieter, something he hadn't used in years. "Emma, thank you for coming to me. You did the bravest thing I've seen in a long time." She blinked, confused, unsure if bravery was something she possessed. He stood up, extending his hand toward her. "Come with me. We're going to take care of your mom. I promise." Emma hesitated only a moment before placing her small hand in his. And as he led her out of the office, Andrew felt something he hadn't felt in years, purpose, sharp and undeniable, taking root in his chest. Emma's small hand clung to Andrew's as they walked through the executive corridor, her steps uneven and hesitant, as though she were afraid the polished floor might swallow her whole. Every passing employee slowed, startled by the sight of their CEO leading a tiny girl through the building. Andrew didn't bother explaining. He barely acknowledged the stares. His thoughts were already racing ahead, assembling questions, possibilities, and worst-case scenarios with the same ruthless precision he used in crisis negotiations. But beneath the analytical machinery of his mind pulsed something else, anger, sharper than he expected, directed at whoever allowed this situation to become possible. He guided Emma into a quiet conference room away from the noise of the office. The space was filled with glass walls, leather chairs, and a long walnut table that looked comically oversized compared to the trembling child now sitting at its edge. Andrew took a seat across from her, folding his hands on the table and forcing himself to speak calmly. He didn't want to overwhelm her. "Emma, I need to understand what's been happening," he said gently. "Can you tell me when your mom got sick?" Emma looked down, swinging her feet nervously above the floor. "A while ago," she murmured. "First she said it was just a cold. But it didn't go away. Then she started coughing a lot, and she got dizzy, and sometimes she couldn't even stand up." Her voice tightened as if each word scraped her throat. "She tried to keep working. She said we needed the money. But one day she fainted at home. And then, she just got worse." Andrew's jaw clenched. He remembered Anna, quiet, hard-working, never missing a shift. A woman who didn't complain. The kind of employee companies quietly relied on while pretending not to notice them. "Did she tell anyone here that she was sick?" he asked. "Did she ask for help?" Emma nodded slowly. "She talked to someone. A man in a suit. He said he'd call her back." The girl swallowed. "But no one ever called." That was the moment Andrew's anger sharpened into something cold and focused. Someone on his staff had ignored a desperate plea for help. Someone had let this family fall into crisis because they couldn't be bothered to make a call or send a message. "Emma," he said softly, "what happened when your mom stopped working?" "She cried," the girl admitted. "She didn't want me to see, but I heard her in the bathroom. She said she didn't know how to pay for the medicine anymore. Then she got a fever. And it didn't go away. She sniffed but refused to shed tears, as though she believed crying would make everything worse. So I thought, maybe if I could get a job, I could help her." She lifted her gaze slowly, her blue eyes shimmering with a mixture of fear and hope. "You're the boss. I thought maybe you would understand." The simplicity of her reasoning broke something in him. How many times had he walked past families on the street without thinking twice? How many times had he donated money without ever seeing the faces it was meant to help? But now, sitting across from a child whose life had been quietly unraveling while he sat in boardrooms discussing stock projections, the distance between his world and hers felt obscene. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Emma, you did the right thing coming to me," he said. "But from now on, you don't need to worry about anything alone. I'm going to help you. I'm going to help your mom." Emma's lips parted, but she didn't speak, as though she didn't trust herself to believe him yet. Andrew exhaled slowly and stood. "We're going to your home," he announced. I want to see your mom myself. Emma rose from her chair, gripping the strap of her backpack so tightly her knuckles turned white. But, won't you get in trouble? She asked quietly. You're important. And I'm just. He cut her off gently but firmly. You're not just anything. You're Emma Miller. And you walked all the way into my office because you love your mom. That makes you braver than half the people I know. Her eyes widened with a fragile flicker of pride. He led her out of the conference room, through the lobby, and into the elevator. As they descended, Andrew glanced at her small, frightened reflection in the mirrored walls. She stood close to him, too close, and he realized she had no idea how to rely on anyone. Trust was a foreign language she was only beginning to learn. In the car, she sat stiffly, hands folded in her lap, staring out the window as the skyscrapers gave way to older streets. Are you scared to see your mom like this? He asked softly. Emma nodded. I'm scared all the time, she whispered, as if confessing a secret she had been hiding for months. But I have to be strong for her. Andrew swallowed the tightness rising in his throat. You don't have to be strong alone anymore, he said. Not while I'm here. She didn't answer. But her small hand reached toward him, barely brushing his sleeve, the faintest instinctive search for reassurance, one he met without hesitation. He gently took her hand, and she gripped his fingers as though anchoring herself to the first piece of safety she'd felt in a very long time. As the car turned onto a worn, narrow street lined with peeling paint and broken windows, Andrew felt an unsettling mix of dread and determination. He had stepped into crises countless times as a CEO, but this was different. This wasn't numbers on a page or stock prices falling. This was a child's world collapsing. And he was already too deep in it to turn back. The hallway leading to the Miller's apartment felt like a place forgotten by time. Dim lights flickered overhead, paint peeled off the walls in brittle curls, and the thin carpet underfoot had long since surrendered any trace of softness. Andrew walked slowly, adjusting his pace so Emma didn't have to rush. She kept close beside him, her small hand clutching the fabric of his sleeve rather than his fingers this time, as if afraid she might be judged for needing reassurance. In the quiet of the hallway, her breathing sounded too quick for a child her age, and he wondered how many times she had walked this path alone, terrified of what she would find on the other side of the door. When they reached the apartment, Emma hesitated before inserting the key. Her hand shook slightly, and Andrew noticed. Emma, he said gently, you're safe. I'm right here. She nodded, though her eyes told him she wasn't convinced, and with a soft click she unlocked the door. The air inside was cold enough to make him inhale sharply. A draft swept across the floor, carrying with it the faint smell of dampness and old medication. The room was dim, illuminated only by a weak lamp on a cluttered table. Blankets were piled over a sagging couch, and beneath them lay a figure he recognized the moment he stepped closer. Anna Miller looked nothing like the woman he remembered from the office hallways. Her skin, once warm and lively, was now pale and tight against her cheekbones, her hair clung to her forehead in limp strands, her breathing was shallow, each inhale sounding like an effort she didn't have the strength to make. She tried to sit up when she saw him and failed, sinking back into the blankets with a faint gasp. Mr. Harrington, she whispered, her voice little more than a strained breath. I didn't know Emma had gone to you. I'm so sorry. She shouldn't have bothered you. Andrew stepped forward immediately, raising a hand to stop her from moving. Anna, don't apologize. You're sick. You should have been taken care of long before this. He looked around the apartment, noting the half-empty bottles of cheap medicine, the stack of unpaid bills on the table, and the portable heater in the corner that was clearly broken. A surge of anger rose in him again, directed this time at himself. How had he not known? How many layers of middle management incompetence or cruelty had stood between him and one of his own employees? Emma hurried to her mother's side, gently lifting her hand and squeezing it. I told him we needed help, Mommy, she whispered. I told him you're very sick. Anna closed her eyes, a few silent tears slipping down her temples, and Andrew felt a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with human responsibility. He crouched beside the couch, his voice firm but warm. Anna, we're going to the hospital. Right now. I've already arranged everything. She immediately shook her head weakly, a reflex born from worry rather than reason. No, I can't afford that kind of, he interrupted her gently but decisively. You're not paying for anything. I am. She opened her eyes in shock, but he didn't waver. I don't care how complicated it is. I don't care what it costs. You worked for me for years. You were part of my team, and I failed you by letting this happen unnoticed. Anna tried to speak, but emotion constricted her throat. Emma wiped her mother's tears with the sleeve of her tiny shirt, whispering, It's okay, Mommy. He's helping us. Really helping. Andrew stood and pulled out his phone, calling the private ambulance he'd arranged in advance. When he hung up, he turned to Emma. Can you help gather a few things for your mom? Clothes, any important papers, something she might want with her? She nodded eagerly, relieved to have something she could do. She ran down the short hallway, rummaging through drawers and shelves in a flurry of determination. Andrew returned to Anna and lowered his voice. How long have you been like this? She looked away, ashamed. A month, maybe more. I tried to hide it from Emma at first. I didn't want her to worry, but she saw everything. She exhaled shakily. I didn't want to bother the company. I didn't want to seem ungrateful. And when I finally asked for help, someone in HR said they would look into it. I never heard anything again. Eventually, they said I resigned. Her voice cracked. I never resigned. Andrew felt something inside him go cold and sharp. Someone had deliberately cut her out to avoid dealing with a sick employee. He made a silent promise to himself to find out who that person was and make sure they never held a position of authority again. The sound of sirens grew faintly louder outside, and Emma rushed back into the room with a small bag pressed to her chest. I got her sweater. And her book. And the picture of us, she said proudly. Andrew took the bag from her, his smile warm but brief. Good job, Emma. Your mom will want these. When the paramedics arrived, Andrew stepped aside, watching with a clenched jaw as they carefully lifted Anna onto a stretcher. Emma followed closely, gripping the stretcher rail with both hands. One of the medics looked at Andrew and nodded respectfully, recognizing his authority but also sensing his personal involvement. As they made their way out of the apartment and down the stairwell, Andrew stayed close, subtly positioning himself between Emma and anything that might frighten her. The cold outside hit them like a wall, and Emma shivered. Without thinking, Andrew removed his coat and draped it gently over her shoulders, the fabric swallowing her small frame. In that moment, as the ambulance doors closed and Emma looked up at him with a fragile, trembling hope, Andrew realized that this wasn't just a situation he was stepping into temporarily. This wasn't charity, or responsibility, or guilt. This was a turning point. And he already knew he wouldn't walk away from it. The drive to the private clinic passed in a blur of flashing lights, worried glances, and the soft, trembling breaths of a child trying not to panic. Andrew followed the ambulance in his car, gripping the steering wheel with a tension that made his knuckles pale. His mind kept replaying the sight of Anna lying helpless on the couch, wrapped in thin blankets that did nothing against the cold. He couldn't shake the image of Emma standing beside her, carrying the weight of responsibility no child should ever know. Each time he blinked, he heard Emma's small voice asking if he would get in trouble for helping her, and the question hollowed him from the inside. How had a 6-year-old grown so accustomed to disappointment that she feared kindness? When they reached the clinic, the medical team moved swiftly. The building itself was warm and bright, with clean, wide halls, soft lighting, and staff who greeted patients with calm, practiced compassion. It was a stark contrast to the cold, crumbling apartment Andrew had just left behind. Emma clung to his hand as they entered, her eyes darting anxiously from nurse to doctor to unfamiliar equipment. She tried to keep pace with the stretcher carrying her mother, but her short legs struggled to keep up. Andrew lifted her gently into his arms without asking, feeling her small body tense at first before she relaxed against him, laying her cheek against his shoulder as if she had been carrying too much for too long. Once Anna was taken into an examination room, a doctor approached Andrew with a clipboard. "We'll run a full series of tests," she explained, her tone professional but warm. "Her condition seems severe, but not irreversible. She's dehydrated, undernourished, and suffering from a respiratory infection that has worsened due to a lack of treatment and cold exposure." She paused, glancing at Emma, who listened with wide, frightened eyes. Andrew nodded, urging the doctor to continue. "We'll do everything we can. It may take time, but she's in the right place now." "Do whatever she needs," Andrew said without hesitation. "Cost isn't a factor." The doctor nodded, scribbling notes, but Emma couldn't stay silent. Is she going to die?" she whispered. The question slipped out like a secret she had been holding close, terrified of the answer. The doctor crouched down so she was at eye level with the child. "We're going to help your mom," she said gently. "We're going to make her better." Emma swallowed hard, processing the words with the cautious hope of someone who had learned not to trust promises easily. A nurse led Andrew and Emma to a small waiting lounge with soft chairs and warm blankets. The room was quiet except for the distant hum of medical equipment and the occasional hurried footsteps of staff. Emma sat beside him, legs pulled up to her chest, her eyes fixed on the door through which her mother had disappeared. Andrew tried to offer her a cup of warm tea, but she only shook her head and pressed her face into the crook of her arm, breathing shakily. After a long moment, she spoke without lifting her head. "Mommy kept saying she didn't want to bother anyone," she said. "She said people don't like when you ask for help. But I didn't know what else to do. I thought, maybe if I try really hard, someone will finally listen." The words made something deep in Andrew twist painfully. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and spoke with quiet sincerity. "Emma, listen to me. Asking for help isn't bad. And needing help doesn't mean you're a burden. What happened to your mom wasn't your fault, and it wasn't hers either. Someone in my company failed both of you. But that ends now." She peeked up at him, doubt lingering in her eyes. "You're not mad at me? For coming to your office? For asking to work?" He shook his head firmly. "Emma, I'm grateful you came to me. If you hadn't, I might never have known. And your mom might not be here getting the help she needs." She stared at him for several seconds before her shoulders sagged with relief. Then, cautiously, she leaned sideways until her small frame rested against his arm. The contact was featherlight at first, as though she expected him to pull away, but when he didn't, she allowed herself to settle fully, drawing comfort from his presence. Hours passed, marked by intermittent updates from nurses and small trips to the hallway where Emma stood on tiptoe trying to catch glimpses of her mother. Eventually, the doctor returned and informed them that Anna was stable, responding to treatment, and would be moved to a private room soon. Emma exhaled a shaky breath and held on to Andrew's sleeve like it was a lifeline. He ran a gentle hand over her hair, smoothing a stray curl behind her ear. Once Anna was transferred to her room, they were allowed to see her. The improvement was visible immediately, her breathing had steadied, her skin held a bit more color, and a soft warmth replaced the earlier, frightening pallor. She opened her eyes when Emma rushed to her side, trying to smile despite her exhaustion. "Mommy, they're helping you," Emma whispered, gripping her mother's fingers as though she would never let go. Anna looked at Andrew, eyes glassy with gratitude and pain. "I don't know how to thank you," she murmured. Her voice was still weak, but the relief behind it was undeniable. Andrew shook his head. Just focus on getting better. That's all that matters. Emma glanced at him, then back at her mother, and for the first time since he met her, Andrew saw a spark of genuine hope flicker in her eyes. It was quiet, fragile, but real. And as he watched Emma stroke her mother's hand, whispering promises she finally believed she could keep, he understood with complete certainty that this moment, this fragile family holding itself together in a hospital room, was something he was now irrevocably part of. He wasn't doing this out of pity or duty anymore. Something deeper had taken root, binding him to Emma and Anna in a way he hadn't expected. And he knew that from this moment forward, he would protect them with the same fierce determination he once reserved only for his company. A new purpose had entered his life, carried in on the quiet steps of a little girl brave enough to knock on his door. And he was not letting it go. Emma adjusted quickly to the rhythm of the clinic, as though she had been living in two realities at once, one where she was still a frightened child clinging to her mother's bedside, and another where she had suddenly gained a protector strong enough to support the weight she had been carrying alone. Andrew visited every day, sometimes twice, arriving with quiet steps and a calm presence that made the hospital room feel less like a place of fear and more like a place where healing was possible. He brought warm meals, children's books, a soft blanket he had chosen himself, and a sense of safety so steady that even the nurses began to smile when they saw him enter. On the fourth evening, he found Emma sitting cross-legged on the small couch across from her mother's bed, drawing intently in a notebook. The exhaustion that usually dragged at her features had softened, her cheeks had a touch more color, and her posture no longer held the rigid tension of a child constantly on alert. When she noticed him in the doorway, she lit up, scrambling off the couch and hurrying forward. "You came back," she said, as if she still couldn't believe it each time he returned. "Of course I did," he replied, kneeling slightly so he could meet her at eye level. "How's your mom today?" Emma looked over her shoulder at Anna, who was resting comfortably, and four beside her and a warm light falling across her face. "She's better," Emma said with a quiet pride. "The doctor said she's not in danger anymore. And she ate soup today. A whole bowl." "That's wonderful," Andrew said, truly relieved. He stepped inside, hanging his coat on the back of a chair. "And how are you?" Emma hesitated, then shrugged with a shy smile. "I'm not scared all the time now." The words hit harder than she could know. Andrew reached out gently, tucking a loose curl behind her ear. "Good," he said softly. "You don't need to be scared anymore." He joined Anna's bedside and spoke with her for a while, asking about her treatment, the medications, and how she felt. She tried to apologize again for Emma coming to his office, but he stopped her with a gentle shake of his head. "Emma saved you," he told her. "You raised a brave girl." Anna's eyes glistened with tears she didn't let fall. Later, when Anna drifted into sleep, Andrew stepped out into the hallway to take a call from his legal team. They had begun investigating the HR irregularities surrounding Anna's resignation, and what they uncovered infuriated him. Someone had deliberately removed her from the system to avoid approving her medical leave, classifying her absence as voluntary termination. It was done quietly, with the confidence of someone who assumed no one would ever check. After ending the call, he returned to the room, tension written in the stiff line of his shoulders. Emma noticed immediately, she always did. She approached him with quiet steps, gripping the notebook she had been drawing in. "Are you mad?" she asked, her voice tentative, as if afraid he might turn that anger toward her. He forced a breath, softening his expression. "Not at you," he said. "Never at you." She nodded slowly, accepting the reassurance, and then held out her notebook. "I made you something," she said. He took it, flipping open the cover. Inside was a drawing of the three of them, him standing tall, Emma in the middle holding both adults' hands, and Anna smiling beside them. Behind them was a brightly colored house with a big sun in the corner. At the top, in uneven letters, she had written, thank you for helping us." Andrew felt something warm spread through his chest in a way he hadn't experienced in years. He wasn't sure if it was pride, affection, or some aching mixture of both. "This is beautiful, Emma," he said quietly. "Can I keep it?" She nodded eagerly. "It's yours." They sat together on the couch while Anna slept, Emma curled against his side with her head resting on his arm. At first she simply leaned there without speaking, her breathing soft and even, but then she whispered, "I like when you're here. It feels safe." He looked down at her, taking in her fragile trust, and something in him broke open. He had spent decades building an empire, a life of control and stability, yet he had never felt more needed than he did at that moment with this little girl resting against him. He placed an arm around her gently, not wanting to disturb her but unable to stop himself from holding her close. "Emma," he said softly, "I'm not going anywhere." She exhaled, her small shoulders relaxing fully for the first time. Hours passed before he finally stood to leave, careful not to wake her. But when he reached the door, Emma stirred and hurried after him, catching the sleeve of his jacket before he could step out. Her eyes were wide with a mix of sleepiness and fear. "Will you come back tomorrow?" she whispered. He knelt, brushing her cheek lightly with his thumb. "Yes," he said. "Tomorrow. And the next day. And every day your mom needs me. And you too." She studied his face for a long moment, searching for cracks in his promise, and when she found none, she gave a tiny nod. Only after that did she release his sleeve and step back. As he walked down the hallway, he felt a pull, something gentle but undeniable tugging him back toward the room he had just left. The mansion waiting for him felt colder than ever, like a hollow monument to a life built on isolation. But here, in this hospital, with a frail woman fighting for her life and a brave little girl fighting for her mother, he felt a warmth he hadn't known he was missing. When he reached the elevator, he rested his palm against the wall and closed his eyes briefly. He had stepped into their lives because Emma asked for help. But now he knew with absolute certainty that he would stay because they had become something he could no longer imagine his life without. And tomorrow, when he returned, he would begin the process of making sure they never had to face fear alone again. The morning after Anna was transferred to a recovery ward, Andrew arrived earlier than usual, carrying a quiet determination that felt heavier than his briefcase. He had barely slept, spending half the night on calls with HR, auditing departments, and his legal team, forcing every stone to be overturned until the truth behind Anna's mistreatment came to light. As he stepped into the clinic, staff members greeted him with respectful nods, but he moved quickly through the halls, driven by a mix of anger and protectiveness he no longer tried to suppress. When he opened the door to Anna's room, he found Emma sitting up in the chair beside her mother's bed, swinging her legs and holding a paper cup of warm cocoa. Her face brightened instantly when she saw him. "You came early," she said, her voice still soft with morning sleepiness. "I wanted to check on both of you," he replied. His gaze slid to Anna, who looked far better than she had days earlier. Her cheeks had regained some color, her breathing was smoother, and her eyes, though tired, held a clarity that wasn't there before. She met his gaze with gratitude tinged with embarrassment. "You've already done too much," she murmured. He shook his head. "No. Not even close." Emma hopped off the chair and padded over to him, tugging gently at his sleeve. "Mommy walked a little today," she reported proudly. "Only to the bathroom, but the doctor said it's good." "That's wonderful," Andrew said, smiling as he rested a hand on the girl's shoulder. Despite her attempt to look cheerful, he saw the shadows beneath her eyes. The last few days had taken their toll, but the resilience inside her was undeniable. She was still afraid, still unsure, but she was trying, and he admired her more than most adults he had ever met. After speaking with Anna, he stepped out into the hallway to take another call from HR. This time, the news was worse than he expected. Anna hadn't simply been accidentally removed from payroll systems. Someone had intentionally buried paperwork, forged signatures, and rerouted her documentation. Her termination was engineered, cruelly and efficiently. Andrew listened in growing disbelief before finally ending the call with a clipped order: find out who did it. Today. As he re-entered the room, Emma was by the window, tracing little shapes on the glass with her fingertip. She turned when she heard him, reading his expression instantly. She always did. You're mad again, she said in a small voice. I'm not mad at you or your mom, he reassured her, lowering himself into a crouch so he could meet her eyes. But someone tried to hurt her. I'm going to fix it. Emma's brow furrowed as she processed his words, and after a moment she asked quietly, will they get in trouble? Yes, he said, without hesitation. For everything. She nodded slowly, then reached out and placed her tiny hand on his. The gesture surprised him with its gentleness. Thank you, she whispered. For believing us. They spent most of the day together. Andrew helped Emma with a puzzle the nurses brought in, though she insisted on sitting so close that her shoulder pressed against his. At lunch, he took her to the cafeteria, where he ordered her soup and a sandwich, both of which she tried to push toward her mother once they returned. Only after Anna insisted, twice, that she eat for herself did Emma finally take a bite. In the mid-afternoon, while Anna slept and Emma drew quietly on the couch, Andrew made a few more calls in the hallway. The deeper the investigation went, the more shocking the revelations. The employee responsible for sabotaging Anna's records had been bribed by a competitor trying to undermine Andrew's company. They targeted the most vulnerable people in his workforce, using fear and desperation to manipulate them. Anna was one of several victims. Rage simmered beneath Andrew's calm exterior. He had always believed in the integrity of his business, in the loyalty of his team. Realizing that someone had allowed corruption to grow under his nose struck him harder than he expected. But each time he thought of Anna struggling alone or Emma wandering into his office begging for work, his focus sharpened. He would clean house. He would rebuild trust. And he would not allow anyone to harm them again. When he returned to the room, Emma put down her pencil immediately. Are you leaving soon? She asked, trying to sound casual, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her fear. He sat beside her. Not yet, he said. And when I do leave, I'll come back. You don't have to worry about that anymore. She studied him carefully, as though searching for hidden lies, then slowly nodded. I don't want things to go back to before. He felt those words settle into him with an ache he didn't expect. Neither do I. The afternoon drifted on in a gentle rhythm. Anna woke again and talked with them, moving more comfortably than she had since arriving. Emma fetched water for her, fluffed her pillow with exaggerated seriousness, and beamed every time her mother smiled. Andrew watched them, struck by the simple beauty of the moment. For years, he had surrounded himself with wealth, power, and influence, yet none of it compared to the quiet strength he witnessed in this small, fragile family. As evening approached, he finally stood to leave. Before he could step toward the door, Emma raced to him and wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face in his suit jacket. The hug was sudden, tight, and filled with all the emotion she couldn't put into words. Andrew hesitated only a second before lifting her gently, holding her securely against him. She smelled faintly of hospital soap and crayons, and her small fingers twisted into his collar as though she feared he might disappear the moment she let go. I'll see you tomorrow, he promised softly. She pulled back just enough to look at him, her blue eyes shimmering with trust he felt honored to receive. Promise? I promise. She relaxed then, allowing him to set her down. He glanced at Anna, who watched with grateful tears, and gave her a reassuring nod before stepping toward the door. As he walked down the hallway, the weight he carried felt different, not heavier, but important, shifting his priorities in ways he had not anticipated. He had stepped into Emma's world by accident, through desperation and circumstance, but now he found himself unable to imagine stepping out of it. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. But tonight, for the first time in years, he felt certain he was fighting for something that truly mattered. Andrew arrived the next morning with a purpose so sharp it could have cut through steel, yet the moment he stepped into the clinic room and saw Emma asleep beside her mother, curled up like a small, exhausted bird, everything inside him softened. Anna was awake, propped slightly against her pillows, watching her daughter with a tenderness that made her look stronger despite the 4 lines still attached to her arm. She greeted Andrew with a quiet smile that carried gratitude, guilt, and something like hope. He returned it with a nod before stepping closer. "She finally slept," Anna whispered. "All night. I don't think she's done that in months." Andrew glanced at the small bundle of curls and blankets next to her. Emma was breathing evenly, one hand draped limply over Anna's blanket. "She must feel safer," he murmured. "She's been on alert for so long." Anna's eyes filled with emotion at that. "I should have protected her better." "No," Andrew said firmly, with none of the distant professionalism he usually projected. "You did everything you could. The failure isn't yours. It's mine. My company. My people. They let this happen to you." Anna looked as though she wanted to argue, but before she could speak, Emma stirred. She blinked awake slowly, then sat up with sudden alertness when she saw Andrew. Her whole face brightened in a way that made something deep in his chest ache. "You came," she said simply, as if greeting a constant in her life, not a man she'd met only days ago. "Of course," he said, taking a seat beside her. She climbed off the chair and into his lap without hesitation this time, curling comfortably against him while rubbing the sleep from her eyes. Anna watched the scene with a conflicted mix of relief and worry, but she said nothing. Emma, with the full trust of a child who had finally found someone who showed up, rested her head against Andrew's shoulder. After breakfast and a visit from the doctor, Andrew received a call asking him to come into the office. The legal team had completed their investigation, and urgent decisions needed to be made. He hesitated before answering, glancing at Emma, who was drawing quietly at a small rolling table the nurses had brought her. She looked peaceful, but the moment she sensed his hesitation, she lifted her head. "You're leaving?" she asked, her voice small. He crouched beside her. "Just for a little while," he said. "I need to take care of something important. But I'll be back." She swallowed, fingers tightening around her crayon. "You promise?" "Yes. I promise." He tapped her wrist gently. "And I keep my promises." Satisfied, though not fully reassured, Emma nodded, and he gave Anna a final look before leaving. When Andrew arrived at the office, the air felt tense, thick with fear and anticipation. Executives stood abruptly when he entered the conference room, his presence suddenly colder, sharper, and more controlled than he had been in years. He projected the authority of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. The legal team began their report, describing how documents had been forged, forms hidden, and entire personnel files discreetly destroyed. The man responsible, Daniel Brooks, sat pale and sweating at the far end of the table. Andrew listened in perfect stillness, his face unreadable. When everything was laid bare, he finally rose. "You targeted a woman who couldn't defend herself," he said quietly. "You left a sick mother without income, without support, without hope. And you made a child believe she had to fight the world alone." Daniel stammered, trying to shift blame onto subordinates, onto misunderstanding, onto anything but himself, but Andrew cut him off with a single gesture. "You're fired," Andrew said, his voice glacial. "Effective immediately. Security will escort you out, and legal will pursue full charges." Daniel erupted into pleading, but no one dared intervene. 2 guards entered and removed him from the room while he continued shouting desperate excuses. When the door finally closed, Andrew exhaled slowly and turned his gaze to the executives. From today forward, protocols change. Every employee, especially those in vulnerable positions, will have direct access to oversight. No more hidden decisions. No more exploitation. A ripple of uneasy agreement passed through the room. But Andrew wasn't finished. "There is one more thing," he said. "Anna Carter and her daughter Emma. They are under my personal protection. Any mistreatment, negligence, or disrespect toward them will be dealt with immediately." The room fell silent. When he finally returned to the clinic that afternoon, Emma nearly ran to meet him. She stopped just short of throwing her arms around him, hesitating for a second out of habit, but he knelt and opened his arms to her. She pressed into him without another thought, relief bursting through her small frame. "You came back," she whispered again, clinging to his collar. "I said I would," he replied, brushing her curls gently. "And I always will." Emma pulled back slightly. "You look tired." He gave a faint smile. "It's been a long day." She studied him with the seriousness of someone twice her age. "Did you fix the bad things?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "I'm starting to. And, nobody will hurt Mommy anymore." "No," he said softly. "I won't let them." She wrapped her arms around his neck and squeezed him fiercely, as if sealing the promise between them. Andrew looked over her shoulder at Anna, who watched with tears in her eyes. The gratitude there was overwhelming, but there was something else too, fear of hope, fear of needing him, fear of losing the stability he brought. But Andrew already knew, he wasn't going anywhere. This family had walked into his life by accident. But they had changed him by design. And now, he would not abandon them, not today, not ever. When Anna was finally discharged 2 weeks later, the air outside the clinic smelled like early spring, cool, damp, and carrying the faint promise of something new. Andrew arrived that morning with a calm steadiness that immediately soothed Emma, who had been pacing nervously near the window with her backpack clutched in both hands. The moment she heard the familiar footsteps, she dashed across the room and collided gently with his leg before he bent to lift her into his arms. She wrapped herself around him confidently now, with none of the hesitation that had once shadowed her every movement. Anna watched from the bed, already dressed and sitting upright. The transformation in her was remarkable, her posture straighter, her skin warmer, her voice steadier. But even more striking was the shift in her eyes, no longer haunted by constant survival. There was fear still, yes, but also trust, and that alone made her look younger by years. When Andrew helped her stand, supporting her with a tenderness that made her throat tighten, she whispered, "I'll never be able to repay any of this." "You don't owe me anything," he replied simply. "You and Emma deserved help long before I stepped in." They walked out of the clinic together, with Emma holding both their hands, swinging slightly between them as though she had forgotten she was ever afraid. Outside, Andrew's car waited, and when he opened the door, Emma climbed in confidently and buckled herself without being asked. Anna hesitated before getting in, overwhelmed by the sense that everything was changing too quickly to process. Andrew noticed and paused. "You're safe," he said softly. Anna nodded, exhaling shakily, and slid into the seat. Instead of taking them back to the crumbling apartment they once called home, Andrew drove toward a quiet residential district lined with trees and sunlight that filtered through them like soft gold. Emma pressed her forehead to the window, mesmerized. "Where are we going?" she asked. "You'll see," Andrew replied, his tone warm but guarded with anticipation. He pulled up in front of a modest, beautifully restored townhouse painted soft gray with white trim. A small garden sat out front, still bare from winter but full of potential. Emma's eyes widened as she stared at it, but she didn't dare assume anything. Anna looked confused. "Andrew, whose house is this?" He stepped out, opened Anna's door, and offered her a hand. Yours. Anna froze. What? Yours, he repeated gently. You and Emma can't go back to that apartment. It's unsafe. And you shouldn't have to. I bought this for you. Emma's hands flew to her mouth, eyes shimmering with awe. For us. Yes, Andrew said, kneeling so he was eye level with her. For both of you. And you can stay here as long as you want. Forever, if you choose. Emma launched herself into him, her small arms wrapping around his neck so tightly he almost lost his balance. She buried her face against him and began crying quietly, relief, gratitude, disbelief all tangled into fragile, soft sobs. Anna stood a few steps behind them, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Andrew looked up at her while holding Emma close. You gave everything to your daughter, he said. Let me give something back. Inside, the house wasn't extravagant but warm and welcoming. Soft carpets, clean rooms, new furniture, sunlight pouring through the windows. Emma inspected everything with wide-eyed wonder, opening cabinets, bouncing slightly on the couch cushions, tracing her fingers along the polished banister. When she found a small room painted in soft pastel colors with a bed covered in a fluffy comforter and shelves waiting for books and toys, she froze in the doorway. Is this mine? She whispered, afraid to breathe too loudly. Andrew leaned against the doorframe. Yes. All yours. Emma stepped inside, touching the bed tentatively, then sat, then lay back completely, stretching out as if testing reality. It's so soft, she breathed. I've never had a bed just for me. Anna watched from the hall, covering her mouth as emotion overtook her. After they explored the house, they settled in the living room. Anna sat on the couch while Emma curled into Andrew's side, as though she belonged nowhere else. Andrew rested a hand on her back, steady and gentle. Finally Anna found the courage to speak. Why are you doing all this for us? She asked, trying to hide how fragile her voice had become. He looked at her with a sincerity that needed no embellishment. Because no one should be punished for being vulnerable. Because you were failed by people who should have protected you. And because Emma walked into my office asking to work just to keep you alive. He glanced down at the little girl beside him. She showed more strength and courage than most adults I know. I couldn't turn away from that. Anna blinked through tears, then whispered, You're giving us a life we never thought we'd have. Not giving, he corrected softly. Sharing. That night, when Andrew finally stood to leave, Emma clutched his sleeve again, echoing the same fear she'd had since the first day. Will you come back tomorrow? He crouched down and placed both hands on her shoulders. Tomorrow, he said, and the day after. I'm not leaving your life. She stared at him for a long moment, searching again, always searching. When she finally nodded, Andrew felt something inside him shift into place, a quiet certainty that he was no longer just a man trying to fix a mistake in his company. He was part of a family now. Not by blood. Not by obligation. But by choice. When he walked toward his car, Anna stepped after him and whispered, Thank you, for giving her hope. Andrew turned, meeting her gaze with unexpected emotion. She gave me something too. Anna swallowed. What? He smiled faintly, something warm and honest blossoming in his expression. A reason to be better. He drove away slowly, watching them through the rearview mirror, Anna with her arm around Emma, both standing on the porch of a house that meant safety, future, and healing. Inside the car, for the first time in years, Andrew let himself imagine a life filled not with shareholders and board meetings, but laughter in a living room, drawings on a fridge, tiny footsteps running downstairs. He realized he wanted that life. He realized he wanted them. And for the first time in a long time, the world ahead didn't feel cold or empty. It felt like home.